Holy Gospel. The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 14th chapter. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, his disciples said to Jesus, "Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. And wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." So the disciples sent out and went to the city and found everything as Jesus had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he came with the 12. And when they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be distressed and to say to him, one after another, "Surely not I." He said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the bowl with me. For the Son of Man goes as is written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to them, and said, "Take, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. The Gospel of Jesus Christ. Please be seated. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm St. Andrew's Pastoral Intern, and I'm honored to be preaching to you today. We are recording it too, so my candidacy committee can have a glimpse at how I preach. Today's gospel text is about the Last Supper. It is the Last Supper in the Gospel of Mark, to be precise. Now in mid-November, it seems odd to think about the Last Supper. Usually we hear about this story before Easter, on Maundy Thursday. We hear it in the Gospel of John about the washing of the feet and of the last evening Jesus and his disciples spent together. Today we are reading about the last evening and the last meal Jesus and the disciples are eating together in the Gospel of Mark. I think it is actually very fitting to talk about this text, to talk about the end of Jesus' life now in this time, since we are soon going into Advent. Is it not fitting to think about Jesus' end of life because we are soon going to enter the cycle anew where we are waiting for our Messiah? In Advent, we wait and prepare for the birth of Jesus and think about his second coming. We trust that Jesus lives, and we trust that he will come again. But let us spend some time today on thinking about the end of his life before he would rise again. And let's think about the message that Jesus left behind, the message of hope and forgiveness. Jesus gathered around a table with the ones who followed him. To gather around the table and sharing a meal means being together. Often it is not only about the food, but simply about being together, the conversations and stories that are told. These table fellowships have been part of humanity for so many centuries. We still celebrate them today. I'm thinking of the celebration we are going to have next Friday to raise some money for the cost of my internship. But we will also be together, enjoying each other's company and stories. And then the week after, many of us will have a Thanksgiving meal. And is that meal not often about much, much more than the actual food? Isn't it about expressing thankfulness and being with family? A meal that has become full of rituals in many families. Marcus and I have been at a friend's house for the last 2 Thanksgivings and enjoyed the rides of it immensely. As the person who is becoming a pastor, I was asked to pray before the meal, which I gladly did. My friends did not grow up in a church or with a faith background, which showed when they clapped after I prayed. It was actually really sweet, but very unexpected. But I want to invite you to have these ideas of celebrating a meal as a get-together and full of traditions in mind as we look at today's text. Today's text about the last meal Jesus and his disciples are eating together before everything changes. The text starts at the first day of Passover. The disciples and Jesus are in Jerusalem, and they have to get everything ready for the Passover meal. Now remember, all of them grew up doing this. They know what preparations have to be done for the meal. And so they ask Jesus, we have to prepare everything. What's the plan? Jesus gives them instructions on where to go, who to find, what they will find, and they find everything as he had told them. When I was reading this text, preparing for the sermon, I thought, why do I need to know this? Why do I need to know that disciples ask what the plan is, then Jesus telling them what the plan is, and then everything working as the plan was? Why not write, Jesus and the disciples had the Passover meal in a house in Jerusalem? Because it's not like we know who the man with the jar is or whose house it actually ends up being, where the meal's at. I think the reason why it happened this way and why it is written this way is to tell us more than just how they prepared the meal. We are at the end of the journey. Jesus is already thinking about the cross he will end up on. Everything happening as Jesus foretells it is supposed to say that whatever Jesus told you in his good news, in his gospel, in his message, it is all true. You will find everything as Jesus promised to be. You ask where to go, Jesus will tell you, and it will be true. That is the promise you can trust. That is why this is included in today's text, and we rely on it for the rest of the text and its promise to come. So back to the meal. The Passover meal and its traditions has clear instructions. Again, they all grew up doing this. In the Jewish tradition of the Passover meal, the youngest asks the question, why is this night different from all other nights? And an adult answers, every other night we eat leavened or unleavened bread, but this night we only eat unleavened bread. And then the kid or youngest asks, why in this night there are only bitter vegetables? And an adult answers, and so on. There are 4 questions that come before the meal, which are asked by the youngest and answered by an older one. It happens every year. Every year of their lives, the disciples who grew up Jewish were part of these rituals. As children, it was them who asked the questions. Now they are adults and they answer the questions. The Passover meal is to remember We were slaves to the Pharaoh in Egypt, but God brought us out of Egypt. This is the story that Jesus and the disciples must have told that night, as they had done every year. So what makes this night different? What makes this Passover different from the other ones they had been part of? Jesus tells them. Jesus tells them that this night is going to end in betrayal. This is not just a Passover meal as the ones before. This is the last one. So the disciples and Jesus are having their Last Supper together. The community they had right there and then will break apart. It will break apart soon. One will betray Jesus by giving him over to the Romans, and another one will deny knowing him when asked. Judas and Peter. Jesus knows but does not say their names. In the Mark text, he only talks about the one who betrays him. But it is clear that the fellowship that they had is about to break apart. At the cross, Jesus will be alone. Why is this night different from all other nights? Jesus is saying goodbye to his disciples. He says goodbye with a feast, a meal with the ones who followed him. Good food, conversations, and stories. This should make us feel calm. Jesus eats with sinners as he had done before, and he does so now at Passover and continues to do. And then the moment he says, "One of you will betray me," they all say to him, "Surely not I." Why would they have to ask Jesus these questions if they were sure about their own faithfulness to him? I think by saying "one of you," Jesus is showing all of them what they are capable of. They question themselves, "Wait a minute, could it be me? Surely it's not me, is it?" Maybe this is supposed to happen to the reader too. Would you betray Jesus? Would I? It can't be me, can it? I would not betray Jesus. Surely not I. We hope not. And I wish us all that it will never be tested. But Jesus' intention in asking these questions might lay in telling the disciples and us that we all need forgiveness. We realize our weakness, our potential for betrayal or denial of Jesus, and our actual shortcomings. Or to say it in another way, one of you is going to sin. Surely not I. Surely not you. Right. But here is the most amazing part and most powerful part about God. The meal continues. Jesus breaks bread with all of them. Jesus breaks bread with the weak in their shortcomings, Judas, Peter, and you. They and you are given the bread and wine. Jesus extends forgiveness knowing they will fail. Jesus forgives you at this table, knowing you are not perfect. In the Last Supper, Jesus tells us of a new meaning for bread and wine, Christ's death and resurrection. As the Passover meal had signified that God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, out of slavery, it signifies for us today that Jesus brought us out from slavery to sin. When you receive the wine and bread in communion, it is Jesus who extends forgiveness to you now. Jesus, at the end of his life, offers forgiveness. I think today's Old Testament text can tell us something about this too. Let me explain how. The whole text is a complicated passage, but it underlines Jesus' amazing message in Mark by going a different way. Jacob is also faced with the end of his life, just like Jesus. And he's talking to his sons. And he says to them, "Let me tell you this. Decisions have consequences. Showing character matters to God. God's blessing often are in accordance with our character. And God's grace can turn today's curse into blessings." We learn from Reuben, Simeon, and Levi the consequences of sin, as Reuben lost his birthright and Simeon and Levi lost their land. As a blessing and a positive example, we learn from Judah that confidence is earned by faithfulness. Or we learn from Asher the responsibility of wise stewardship of God's gifting, when Jacob says that Asher's food shall be rich and he shall provide royal delicacies. I'm going to be honest, I never liked Jacob. He deceived his old and blind father to get the blessing for the firstborn and became the head of the family this way. And now Jacob is punishing Reuben and Simeon and Levi by saying decisions have consequences. The scene has similarities to the Last Supper, and it prompts me to tell you this is all still true. Decisions still have consequences, and curses can be turned into blessings. So how does it underline Jesus' message and promise? I think because we all live a life. We try to make good decisions, and we might walk with Jesus all the way to Jerusalem. But surely we will fail sometimes. So if I'm hoping for forgiveness, how can I think it should not be granted to someone like Jacob? And how much bigger is Jesus in his grace than Jacob was at the end of his life? Jesus knows of the one that will betray him and the one that will deny him. But Jesus frees us from the slavery of sin. And that is why that night was so different. The promise of that night is the reason for our and the disciples' hope. Jesus' presence with them will continue. The breaking of the bread and the cup of the new covenant in Jesus' blood has bound them together with each other and strengthened them in a way that they did not know before. But Jesus wants them to live it. It is the end for them as a group, as the one group that they have been. But Jesus does not explain everything that will come, because they have to experience it to understand it and realize that Jesus is still with them whenever they break bread and drink the wine. And it is true for us today. When we break bread today, when we drink of the cup, Jesus is with us. Remember, that is the promise, and everything will be as Jesus described it. There is forgiveness at this table, even though we are not perfect. Surely we are all in need for forgiveness. You're invited to the table, and Jesus wants you to experience it.